I wanted to take the chance, actually I've been talking to Jennifer for a while. You know, the only time I get to address you guys is at the beautiful Christmas party, and I make it to Rory Dolan's once a year, but it would be nice to come here just maybe once or twice a year. You get to see my favorite colleague on the board. Don't tell the other members that. Greg Luisi, who's here, and I know he comes to most of your meetings. Thank you, Greg. He's your favorite? Good. You heard that right, Greg? But I wanted to come and just, have a kind of an open discussion, and somebody said, look, why don't you make the first discussion about the hotel that's being built in our community? I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the new building that was just built on Main Street in Marbledale and some of the improvements in our park, and then kind of just hear from you guys. Most of you guys have lived in our community for as long, if not longer, than I have. I've lived here my entire life. Yes, Jenny? You were... I know. Jenny was born here, I know. 87 years. God bless you. It's changed. It's absolutely changed, I know. So, and you're right, it does happen. It's progress. When you have a community that is so really valuable because of its proximity to New York City, I've said, as you know, I've been on the board for 13 years, and I've always said that Tuckahoe is like the best kept secret in Westchester County. But, the secret got out some years ago, and a lot of people who own land, they finally said, you know what, I'm not going to let this extremely valuable property sit empty. I'm going to go ahead and develop it. So we've seen that not just on the commercial side, but we've seen it on the residential side too. We've seen a lot of people who've had single-family homes. Some of them have been knocked down and rebuilt with more modern homes. So like my house was built in the late 1800s. And the house I live in, which is on Marbledale Road, has been in my family since my grandfather. So my son is actually my son is a fifth-generation Tuckahoe resident. So there's a good example of a house that we live in, which when my grandfather first bought the house, it was a tiny little home. It was the first home on that section of Marbledale Road. And then my dad put a big extension on it. I put a big extension on it. So a lot of people are doing the same thing. So you see a lot of changes in your neighborhood. And we're also seeing that in some of the commercial areas too. So, but to your point, Jenny, it's absolutely a changed Tuckahoe. It's not, when I was a kid, I'd ride my bike all over. Of course, that's what you did. And it's a little different world we live in today, but it's a different world everywhere. But I'm still happy. I tell people that, I travel a lot with the business that I have, and I can tell you that you don't get many places like Tuckahoe left in the United States. The safety that we have and the community that we have of multi-generation families like I see in the room here, that's pretty unique. You just don't see that in a lot of other places. So I brought with me a couple of people today. As you know, I brought Greg Luisi. Raise your hand, Greg. I don't know if everybody knows David Burke. He's standing over in the corner. I've said over and over, the smartest move I ever made sitting on the board was actually saying yes to appointing and then voting for David to be our village administrator. That was such a critical decision, and Jennifer is nodding her head too. So, and Mayor White would recognize that also. To be able to have somebody who works at Village Hall on a steady basis. You all knew Susan Chamara, who worked for the village for 50 years. Susan worked. So not having somebody like that who has that institutional knowledge of the business operations of the village of Tuckahoe, and having somebody who is a business manager, such as what David is, makes all the difference in the world. So thank you very much, David. Thank you for coming today. And I also invited today the guy who owns the construction company who's actually building that hotel, which you're going to start to see the hotel coming out of the ground now. And his name is Lee. He owns Peak Construction Company. So I asked him to bring down a couple of renderings of what that hotel is going to look like. So I guess I'll talk about the hotel first, since that was one of the, I noticed that was put on your agenda. And so as everybody knows, this project is on Marbledale Road. And it's a brownfield project, which means that they actually had to do some environmental cleanup work. So that phase of the project is just about completed now. They've moved into, I don't know if anybody heard that compaction, all the tamping of the soil. Anybody? Okay, yes? You heard about it. So I drove by it. So they did that for probably about a month and a half, I guess. Yes. The rapid compaction of the soil to prep the ground for the actual hotel construction. And now they're into the phase of pouring concrete, putting in pilings for the hotel building. There's also going to be a restaurant, which is going to be on the right-hand side of the Phoenix Fitness Center. And within a short period of time, you guys are going to see an actual hotel. So I'm going to ask Lee if you just kind of jump in and describe the hotel, what brand it is, how tall it is, how many rooms, and kind of give you a little summary as to where it's going to be placed on the property. So Lee, if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Sure, I'd love to.
I'll grab the boards if you want.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mayor. I really appreciate that introduction. Again, my name is Lee Cruzen. I'm from Buffalo, New York. I'm one of the owners of Peak Construction Company. We're a construction management firm, and we build large hospitality and residential buildings throughout the Northeast. So we typically build apartment buildings, condominiums, those types of things. So we've been working with the owner of this project for approximately a year at this point. And as the mayor had indicated, the first phase of this construction project was a brownfield cleanup project. And as I'm sure most people are aware, the Marbledale Quarry was the site of a trash dump for many years. And then it was abandoned and it was left as a grassy field. And it started to be developed about last summer or so. So what that consisted of was basically doing an exhaustive environmental research of the property to find out exactly what the chemical makeup was, and then dispose of those properties or those compounds appropriately. The DEC has been handling the oversight of that, and we've been working in concert with those folks, like I said, we have been working with them for about a year, but the project itself has actually been in the works for about 8 years or so. So we're about 99% done with the environmental portion at this time, and we've really transitioned strongly from the environmental remediation work to the construction aspects. And so as the mayor had mentioned, the first part of that job that we have to do is what's called a piling. And a piling is basically a structural support member that's going to hold up the hotel. It goes in the ground, you don't see it, and they're basically large columns of concrete. And that was the first thing. We've been working on that for about 6 weeks or so now. And we're about 2 weeks or so from wrapping that work up. Then the rest of the building is more traditional, what you would expect. It's going to be a foundation, and then there's some structural steel on the first floor, and then the rest of the building is actually 5 stories wood frame construction, just like most of your homes would be done. So as you can see from the picture here, the property is going to be a Marriott hotel. The particular brand is called the Spring Hill Suites. It's going to be a 5-story building, and it's going to have 153 rooms. And it's going to have a lobby area, much like you would expect in most hotels. It's going to have a pool, a fitness room, common area. They're going to serve breakfast and so on, meals, a lounge, and so on. All the amenities that you'd come to expect in a hotel. As you can see on the board here, which is an aerial view, it's kind of like a Google view, if you will, of the property. You can see that on the top left side of the property is where the hotel is going to be positioned. And then on the right-hand side, which is the more northern end, is going to be a new restaurant. Now, at this point, the restaurant development is really, it's not nearly as developed as the hotel plan. The hotel plan is finished, and we're in the process of building it. The restaurant plan, although it was approved last year in the Planning and Zoning Board, the actual restaurateur has not been confirmed at this point, and we're not exactly sure when that property is going to start. So at this point, like I said, we're almost done with pilings and we've just started the foundation. Now, over the next couple of months, we're going to be doing a lot of things where you really won't see a lot of the development happening. It's a lot of underground plumbing, underground electrical, foundation work, those types of things. So there'll be a lot of activity on the site, you know, a lot of workers and so on, but not a lot to be seen because it's happening just below the surface of the ground. And when I say just below, I mean within a couple of feet, 2 or 3 feet to the surface. So in roughly 2 months or so is when you're going to actually start to see the structure sprout out of the ground. In roughly September, the month of September, you're going to start to see structural steel. That's the red, you know, beams that everybody's familiar with. You're going to see that go up. And then right after that is when you're going to actually start to see the wood framing that will start to stand up above the fence line. And over the course of the subsequent months, October, November, December, January, February is when the rest of the wood framing will take place. Then into the spring and summer of next year is when you'll actually start to see the finishes on the building. The outside of the building will start to come to life. The roof will be on it, windows will go into it, those types of things. And then we'll have 4 or 5 months of interior work. That's the drywall, paint, wallpaper, ceramic tile, those types of things to finish out the property. So in a nutshell, that's the overall timeline, and right now our goal is to have the property open and available to the public in the fall of 18, which is, you know, just over a year from now. So in a nutshell, that's the general overview. Does anybody have any questions about any of the things that I just covered? Yes, in the back?
That wood frame, aren't you afraid of fire?
Actually, fire and safety considerations are a very big part of what is done. Now, when the project is designed, the architect of record, who in this case is, as you can see on the boards, is Warschauer, Malusi Warschauer. They're from Elmsford. They have to design the entire structure based on the International Building Code. And the building code takes into many facets of construction, not just fire safety, life safety, thermal conditions, energy code, all of those facets roll into that. So there are some very serious life safety considerations that have gone into this plan. The building is completely fire sprinklered. There are fire separations between the rooms, between the floors, the exterior of the building, and the like. The fire department has an opportunity. In fact, they've already done that. They've reviewed the plans. They make comments, and then we review those comments, and then we implement them into the design. So you're absolutely right. You know, wood frame does present some challenges, but all the codes are out there, and it's taken very, very seriously, not only on my part and my company's part, but that of the design and the village. And the village is playing a very important role as well. They're reviewing all the plans, providing us with feedback as well. So, does that answer your question?
Just to follow up on that, so are most, this is a 5-story hotel, are most 5-story hotels like this wood framed?
The vast majority, if you see a hotel that's 4 stories, there's probably better than 95% chance it's wood framed. Now this is maybe a little bit too much detail, the 5-story wood frame construction is a relatively new construct that's been approved and changed in one of the most recent editions of the International Building Code. It wasn't allowable beforehand, but now it is. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, why did you pick the village of Tuckahoe? We don't need a hotel in this village. What is the benefit?
Well, that question would be best answered by the actual owner and the developer. I represent the owner, but I don't make those types of decisions. But I can tell you, generally speaking, for any type of development, whether it be a hotel or an apartment building, condo, there's what's called a feasibility study. And that's a study done by a marketing firm that goes out and polls the local population in a given area and finds out the need of any type of a business, whether it be a restaurant or a store, hotel, all those types of things. So that particular question, you know, what's the need in the local area, would have been done years ago. Probably, my guess is, I think it was done about 5 years ago or so, these decisions were made.
Well, maybe the mayor can answer the question.
I'll give it my best that I can. The question was, why a hotel in Tuckahoe? And I've actually had that question posed to me many times. And the answer is really not an answer that the mayor has, but it's one that I ask the property owner, which is Mr. Weinberg. Hold on a second. And so Mr. Weinberg, who owns AmHack, everyone sees AmHack up on White Plains Road, all makes heating and air conditioning. His company is the one who owns this property. They've owned it for many years. The village never owned any of this property on Marbledale Road. So the question I asked him years ago was the exact same question. Why a hotel? What if it fails? Does it become a building that we wouldn't want, an undesirable location? And what if it does fail? So the questions that there are the answers that I got from him then and still today, because I asked the question, I didn't just ask it then, I ask it, a lot of time has gone by. And there's been other hotels that have opened up in Westchester County. So that was a concern of mine. Is there a saturation of hotel rooms and now this is no longer needed? Well, the answer to that question that I've been told is no. The first thing I always take a step back and say, okay, if somebody's taking $30 million of their money and putting it into a project, if they're going to put it into something, they're going to put it into, people wake up in the morning to make money, to fortunate or hopefully build a product that's going to be successful for them, and in our case, hopefully for our community. He still feels very confident, or 100% confident, that this hotel is going to be almost fully occupied. So I asked him, so who's going to stay there? Well, my family will stay there because I have 2 bedrooms in my house. So when my family comes to, so there, that's an exaggeration, but we have in between Bronxville, let's start with Scarsdale, Eastchester, Bronxville, and Tuckahoe, there are no hotels in those municipalities at all. So right now, where does my family stay when they come to visit me because they can't, they don't want to sleep on the couch? I actually put them over in that New Hampton Inn when they came in for an event we had in January. I got the last 2 rooms that was in that place on Tuckahoe Road, which shocked me because the place had just been opened. Prior to that, last year, we actually went to Greenberg. So, and of course you can go to White Plains, there's hotels in White Plains. So now we have some that are in Cross County Shopping Center, and there's quite a few others in Yonkers. But the thought process from the property owner and the developer, Mr. Weinberg, is that between Lawrence Hospital, Sarah Lawrence College, Concordia College, between these colleges and the hospitals, I should say the hospital, and there's medical groups up around the Lord and Taylor area. They've talked about that quite a bit. They have already, I'm not going to say pre-booked, but they have a pre-commitment for a substantial amount of the rooms that are going to be in this hotel. So that, to me, gave me a very good comfort that it's going to be a successful business. Whether it was a 7-Eleven or a Marriott hotel, we want it to be a successful business, whatever it's going to be. A lot of people ask me to say, okay, well, let's say worst thing that happens and the hotel fails and now it's empty. What happens then? Well, this hotel had a lot of scrutiny, as people who watch our meetings and they watch the planning board meetings saw. And the way the approval was written, if this particular hotel, Marriott Spring Hill Suites, were to vacate this property, the project would have to go back to the planning board for approval for any other, even another brand. If they wanted to make it a Super 8 motel or a Hilton hotel, they would actually have to go back for approval to get that approval. So there would be a public hearing, a process for people to say, you know what, I don't want a Super 8, I want a Hilton or a Hyatt hotel that's here. So in terms of a change of hotel brand, that's what would have to occur. So then the next question I had quite often was, all right, let's say a hotel just doesn't work and it's never going to work for whatever the brand is going to be in the village of Tuckahoe. Could this become a shelter of some type? Could it become a housing unit for, yeah, exactly, right. And the answer to that is no. And the reason why is because the zoning on Marbledale Road in that area does not permit, there's a certain quantity of days that you can sleep in any project on Marbledale Road. So it doesn't permit it. So the only way that would happen was the village board, whoever the village board would be at that time, they would actually have to change the zoning to allow a multi family unit to be permitted in that zoning category on Marbledale Road. So that would have to be a whole process of a public hearing and a change to the zoning code. I doubt, I mean, I could tell you that I would doubt that any village board would actually modify a zoning to allow a shelter of some type in a structure like that if it wasn't successful.
So the government can't come in and say, okay, we need this, we're taking it
No,
over.
that's why we have home rule, because we're in charge of that. That's why it's so important that we maintain that. Yes,
But
yeah.
it could happen. Your zoning boards change all the time. Rules change, laws
That's
change.
no, this is a law. This becomes a village board decision, not the zoning board. So it's a code. It's part of the village board of trustees is the one who will go ahead and change this. Let's say where your home is, let's say it's zoned for single family use. And let's say somebody came to us and said, we want to change your street to apartment buildings. That whole process has to go before the village board of trustees. There's a public hearing, there's an application that has to be made. It's actually it's an expensive and a lengthy process. And then at the end of the day, you've got the village board of trustees who would have to say, should we allow your street to be changed from single family homes to apartment buildings? And most likely we would not be in favor of that, right? Yes, ma'am.
Why are we building more for senior residents? We're building all these high rental apartment buildings and not just for seniors.
Well, unfortunately, the only property I own is my little postage stamp. So if I could build a senior building on that, I would be in favor of. But I think
Building all these expensive rentals, but nothing for seniors.
well, there is. I'm not sure if the project on Jackson Avenue, if that's for seniors, that new
It's a 55 plus.
55 plus, the new building that's under construction there. Okay.
About affordable housing for seniors, not all these $3,000-$4,000 a month rents. That's
Oh, you mean like the new building that was built? Oh, okay, I understand. Right. Here, right, exactly. Here, and that's very high-end rent. I mean, they're a couple of $1,000s a month for those, and they're starting to rent them, which is quite fascinating.
studio, $2,000 or whatever.
Right.
For a studio, I mean.
No, I know.
Even down Crestwood, across from the station, that new apartment building they built there.
Those studios, and they're all filled too. They're all filled, I'm told.
There's nothing for us also.
Yes.
Why separate the two buildings?
I'm sorry?
Why separate the two buildings, the restaurant and the hotel?
Oh, because actually the land, Lee could probably talk about this, but
Pick up where the cars are.
well, the actual property that he owns is sort of like a U horseshoe shape. So, he owns the property that you see, the big area where Verizon used to park all their cars. And then he owns all the property behind all those buildings, behind the fitness center, and then he owns the property on the right-hand side of the fitness center. So it's a U shape like that. So the hotel's going to be situated on the far left back corner. There'll be parking, like I guess there'll probably be a circular drive. I'm assuming, I don't know. There's probably a circular driveway in the front. And the parking is going to be behind where those buildings are. And then the restaurant is sort of a separate issue. He has the land, and he's decided to build a separate restaurant, which I remember watching the planning board meetings, is going to be positioned back with parking in front of it. You know, we've been really putting a lot of heat on him, trying to understand what type of restaurant is it going to be. Is it going to, you know, we have no idea.
What about the parking?
There's actually quite a bit of parking. There won't be any flow over, parking flow over onto the street, that's for sure. Space is something they actually had quite a bit of on this site. And like I said, with the land that they have, which runs, I don't know how long,
It's 3.5 acres.
it's 3.5 acres site. So there's a tremendous amount of property behind those buildings that you see in the front of Marbledale Road. And that's where most of that's going to be all paved parking. Yes, ma'am.
You know, I was just reading about how some hotels are filling up their rooms by renting it for a day. Could they do that at a hotel like this? If the rooms are vacant, they'll rent it for a day or something like that.
Well, I believe they're daily rentals. So, in other words, can you just check in for the day, you're saying? Yes. It's a hotel, so I could, if I wanted to get down there and take a room for the day, to get out of the doghouse, yes. Yes.
My simple question is, how many people
The restaurant, I don't believe they've gotten anywhere as close to the size of the restaurant. I don't know, maybe Lee can.
The size was approved, the actual building shape, it's a single story, again.
Well, I'll hold him now.
It's a single story structure, and it's gonna be about 70 feet wide and 100 feet deep. You know, it's roughly a rectangle. And that's about as far as the development of the restaurant has gone. As far as what the actual restaurant's going to be, how many people it's gonna seat, those types of things, that it just hasn't been decided at this point that I'm aware of.
You know, one of the things that I'm aware of is, you know, you put a hotel in your community, you put a restaurant, and what does that mean? It means that there's definitely an opportunity for people to work. So the village does not own this property. We don't own the hotel. You know, it's private land. People are allowed, we are all allowed to develop our property within the laws that the municipality has. But I feel that it's the responsibility of the village administration to make sure that when a project or commercial developer comes in, that we exercise every opportunity that we have to make sure that the jobs are hopefully going to be local jobs, and that we can get the best, you know, benefits that we can for our community. Because at the end of the day, we're the ones who have lived here and will live here moving forward. So that's something that we're going to be taking a stronger look at later this fall. You know, once they start to really get the meat and potatoes of the actual hotel, there'll probably be a management company for the hotel, and that's who I intend on talking to as to, you know, there's a lot of hotel employment as well as restaurant once they come to terms with the restaurant.
We'll go there for lunch one day.
Yes.
Of the restaurant.
I'm sorry?
Will the village decide on the owner of the restaurant or the hotel?
No, the village has no decision-making at all in terms of that, because it's all privately owned. It's all owned by the Bill Wynn Development Corporation. So I've asked him, you know, how do you make a decision? Does he wake up and say, you know what, I want a Denny's restaurant there. I want a, you know, I don't know what he wants. And what I'm told is that they actually hire a company who will come into the community and actually spend some time and do a complete analysis as to what the need is. Because of course you want to go ahead and put a restaurant that has a need. So they may come in and say, you know what, you shouldn't put another pizzeria because you got 4 pizzerias within a, you know, 500 square foot radius. So I really have no idea what that selection will be. I don't think the owner of the property really even knows at this point.
Do you think it'd be large enough for, say, a big dinner party or a wedding or something?
I don't think it's big enough. I don't think that the footprint of the building is big enough for like a catering hall, but yeah, don't know. Yes, sir.
Could the restaurant then be a McDonald's or a Burger King or a nature of that?
Yeah, the question was, can the restaurant be a fast food? And the answer to that is absolutely no. And looking at Trustee Luisi, because we actually adopted legislation 2 years ago, early last year, to actually, we adopted the same language that the town uses, where Subway happened to be in. They had their application in just before we closed that door, but we closed the door on that opportunity. Yes?
Can you address the traffic issues and
Yes.
the changes to traffic flow at Marbledale, the intersection of Main Street, which is horrific now?
Right. The question is traffic, and you know, how much is this going to burden the traffic on Marbledale Road and on Main Street? How much is it going to burden it above and beyond the burden that we have now, that we all live through now? The developer was required to do a traffic study. Now, they all do a traffic study, and a lot of them come in and they bring you a book that's, you know, 6 inches thick that, you know, you get through the first 15 pages and it's very difficult to interpret. So we give it to our village's planner and we have him go through it and tell us the real deal. You know, how is this really going to impact it? So there were some improvements that were required. The planning board, actually that book went to the planning board. So they require the developer to make some improvements right in front of the site, right where Jackson Avenue is. So there's going to be some improvements there to prevent any kind of gridlock or bottleneck right in front of the hotel. But in terms of overburdening that intersection where the traffic light is at We spoke to the chief of police. He looked at the data. We don't necessarily feel that there's going to be an impact there because the way we understand it, it's not like you have, you know, everyone going into the hotel site at one particular time. It's not like school, you know, where everyone is going in. You know, one of the things that we looked at was, okay, if there was a different type of use, if there wasn't a hotel, one of the things I really looked at was if, let's say, that building was a 5-story medical office building at that location, and it was filled with dentists and doctors who are going to see a dozen patients, each one per day. The quantity of traffic that would have generated would have been pretty unbelievable. You know, we look at the medical office building that has a lot smaller than this building is, and the one that's on Main Street, the beautiful building that's on Main Street, and they have underground parking, and they have quite a bit of parking, but this would have been so much more intense than that had it been that type of a use, if he had chosen to go that route. So, you know, we don't anticipate that there's going to be any additional traffic burden at Main Street and Marbledale Road. If there is, then we're going to address it. We're actually looking at a safer pedestrian crosswalk right at the park now. Everyone has seen the improvements we did in the park, and we actually want to make it a little safer for people to get across Main Street because we know that's a little bit challenging right now. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, talk about the traffic. Why are the lights so slow on Scarsdale Road and Main Street, Depot Square? I mean, it backs the traffic up, correct?
It's painful.
There's heavy traffic.
It's such a thorn in on my side. It's always been. And I can tell you who it bothers more than anybody is Trustee Antonio Leo. Greg is laughing in the back. Because every meeting he will tell us exactly how many minutes, not seconds, it takes for that light to change. But to answer your question, what a lot of people don't realize is that all the lights are synced together. Believe it or not, the light at Marbledale and Main, the light at Cameron, the light at the big light intersection at Columbus and Main Street, and then the light at Lake Avenue. All of those are linked together. And what I mean by that is, let's say I'm at the Main Street Park and I push the pedestrian signal, that will trigger the traffic light at Lake Avenue and Main Street. They're all synced together. The State Thruway Department actually manages that whole synchronization. So we have really kicked around a lot of different concepts. You know, we've gone to the point of saying, look, what if we adopted the same concept that they use in New York City, which is there is no, you know, it's red or red, you know, green or green. There's no push the button and you get 15, 30 seconds to cross the street. You just have to wait until, right, well, you would just have to wait until you have that opportunity. And the problem there is that do people respect pedestrians crossing an intersection? Now that's a pet peeve of mine. I've said this if anybody's watched at our meetings, I find it drives me crazy that when I am in Bronxville and I come to an intersection and people step off the curb, I lock the brakes up. So why is it that I do that in Bronxville, but I'm not going to say that I do that everywhere else, and I can tell you that I don't see that anywhere else. What is it that Bronxville has? Well, it's not so much that they have cops everywhere ticketing. They'll ticket you if you're a second over on your meter, that's for sure. Tuckahoe's pretty but it just amazes me of the level of pedestrian respect in Bronxville that we do not have in Tuckahoe. And that's something I've talked to the chief about, and I'm hoping that we can change. And I think that if there's more respect for pedestrians who are crossing a crosswalk, then we might possibly be able to get to a point where we could have traffic signalization where there isn't a 30-second pause where all traffic is stopped just to let somebody cross the street. I think that's really going to be the only solution to that.
I feel Jefferson and Washington Street there up Main Street, sometimes nobody ever stops the pedestrian. You can stand there on that corner for ages.
And that's crossing Main Street, you mean, at Jefferson and Washington, crossing over Main Street, you mean? Yeah. To get to like where the medical office building is there.
Yeah, but the office building, the stores, you know, the restaurants, and then now the new apartment building.
Right.
It's almost
very difficult. The question was to get across the street there. So it's kind of a challenge. You know, years ago we talked to our planner, and believe it or not, one of the things that would have alleviated some of this is to put a roundabout in the intersection of Lake Avenue and Main Street. Now, anyone who's been here as long as I have, remember there used to be a little traffic island. Jenny, you must remember that. There was an island with a traffic signal on that podium right there. So there was, in essence, they had traffic islands, and they felt, Mayor White will attest that they eliminated those when a lot of it was when they did the bridge reconstruction. But had we have, like in Bronxville, you have two roundabouts. They call them a roundabout. You have one as you're coming down to the bottom of Sagamore, and then you have one in front of the hospital. Those roundabouts eliminate a traffic signal, and it makes a continuous flow of traffic. We actually, many years ago, when I was first on the board, we had an analysis done to see if it would fit, and the answer was yes, it would fit. The downside was that at that time it was about $250,000, so Lord knows what it is today. But there are some solutions, and that's something that could be done. Yes, ma'am.
Coming down Winter Hill, when you're coming down, you pass the car wash,
Mm-hmm.
you want to make a left onto Midland Place, and cars are just blocking you. You can't get onto Midland Place, and now the traffic is building up, going up Winter Hill. So what can be done?
I see your point.
Coming to, I'm telling you.
Right. So what you're saying is that they're blocking the box is what they're doing. Right.
And there's nothing for them. There's no sign that says,
Don't block the box.
Intersection.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
The question was on Main Street, on Winter Hill, actually now transitions into Main Street. If you want to make the left onto Midland Place, if there's cars blocking Midland, you can't make that left onto it. So we'll talk to the chief. David, I can see he's taking notes right now. So.
And with the
Yep.
new building there,
Right.
I mean, I don't think there's even a strip.
A pedestrian strip, or even a zebra stripe, you mean, right? Yep.
To let them know, do not block that
Right.
intersection, because then traffic builds up.
Yeah, no, I could see that happening, yes. Actually, a similar situation like that occurred at where that new building was placed in Crestwood. If you're coming down Fisher Avenue, there actually is an entrance to park on that property behind the building there. And similar situation there was a lot of people who were blocking that entrance, so that was just blocking people who wanted to turn in. So, yeah, it's the old don't block the box concept. Yes, I agree with you.
If I'm stopped trying to get on to Midland Place, and a car is coming around that little bend, and they don't see that there's a car stop.
Right. I can see David took notes, so he'll be talking to the chief about that. So there's been a lot of changes going on. I guess, ma'am.
I have one, even though the question is
Sure.
moot at this point, may I ask you a question personally?
Absolutely.
Would you build a house on this site and raise your family?
Absolutely.
You feel that safe about the emissions from the ground and so on?
I can tell you having seen a lot of the news and a lot of the information that's circulated about this property, it's just not accurate. Having personally sat in the meetings with the DEC, with the Department of Health, with the village, and all the associated agencies that are involved with this, there are much worse sites in other places where they're doing other things. This
Which
is
sites doesn't matter, I was just saying, would you build down there?
yeah. I guarantee you, when this hotel is open, I'll be staying in it. And
Save you.
absolutely, absolutely.
We'll leave the line on for you, that's right. Yes, Mr. Luisi.
I just want to clarify what Charlotte said.
Yes.
The remediation process for a residential structure would be much more stringent than the requirements that were required for the hotel. But nobody, I mean, first of all, that area is not zoned for residential, number one. But if, for argument's sake, they did want to build, it was allowed for residential homes, the remediation process would have been much more dramatic than it was for the site today. And that's not to say that they did not do an excellent job in remediating the site. So I just want to clarify.
So they, yes, as Trustee Luisi was saying, well, they've been working on it for quite a long time now. And, you know, the village hired, and fortunately the planning board gave us the teeth to go ahead and hire our own environmental company to go ahead and sit with the DEC, which is who you folks pay for. That's on your tax dollars, the DEC. But it's funny, we have, being the mayor, of course, is a part-time gig. So I own a scaffolding business it's been in my family for over 100 years. And one of the things I've realized is that you have to, if you're working on a project, and I've made it a point all the years I've been on the board, when you have a large project coming out of the ground, you must meet on a routine basis. You must sit in a room with the village administrator, with the building inspector, so critical, with the developer and his team to let it all out. And that's what we did this morning for an hour. And you know, sometimes these meetings, there's a little bit of a shouting match, but I have to tell you, every time I leave these meetings, I'm like, thank God we did it, because there's always a little detail like, wow, you know what? Okay, let's make sure these two entities are on the same page. So the project doesn't move forward when it shouldn't, maybe on a particular detail. But one of the things we talked about today was the level of oversight. And when I sat back and I was listening to Lee talk about it, there has been so much overlapping of, and that's not really a bad thing, but there's been so much overlapping of professional management of the whole brownfield remediation elements of this. And so from that standpoint, as Greg mentioned and Lee said, you know, we're satisfied, you know, well, but we're at the point now where, you know, we're putting our boots on to make sure that this project is built properly. And we're giving our building department, and David Burke is making sure that he's weighing in, myself too, to make sure that we meet with Lee. We're all on the same page for him to build what we see on these renderings here. Because, you know, at the end of the day, we're the ones who live in this community. That building will be here, so we want it to be a safe building, and we want it to be a successful building. So that's, yes, ma'am.
On the environmental issue, what are the conditions that might occur, situations that might occur that could stop construction?
Well,
in other words, it never gets built and something comes out environmentally. Or is there a scenario like Bronxville, for example? I know they've hired lawyers and they're going to be monitoring their water conditions, et cetera. Can somebody else come in and stop the project?
I can.
yeah, I'll let Lee answer that. Or maybe you want to repeat the question first.
Well, I can tell you.
Repeat the question.
So the question that she asked is, what could happen from an environmental perspective that could potentially stop the project indefinitely? And I'll say at this point, it's very, very, very unlikely. We're basically to the end. So at the beginning of the process, there was a document put in place by the DEC called the RAWP, or the Remedial Action Work Plan. And that's the basic document that we all follow to implement the remediation. And it's literally hours and hours and hours put in by an entire team, a huge team of people to build this document. And the document tells us not only what the goal is as far as the outcome, but also how to reach the goal and what the steps are as far as implementing the remediation process. There are several things that could have happened through the remediation. You know, say we're digging up an area and we find something that we weren't expecting. Something like that could have stopped us. But there were procedures put in place that if we had have encountered anything unusual, how to handle that situation. And there was contingency plan on top of contingency plan, all these just-in-case type procedures. At this point in the process, we're basically done with that. So to answer your question, I would say that outcome is highly unlikely at this point. We're a construction site at this point, just like everybody else you would expect on any other construction site. The vast majority of the environmental remediation at this point is complete. Yes, ma'am?
Should have gotten a couple of these, I guess. Okay. Thank you. Yes?
On the building, on Jackson Avenue, is the town on it or somebody else?
The town, the village, you mean? That new building that's going up?
Jackson.
Yeah.
Who will own it?
That's privately owned. The town doesn't own it. It's actually located in the town of Eastchester. It's Yeah, it's the Allied building. It's the Seminara family. They own other projects in the village. They own the Allied house. The Seminara family owns that.
And anybody move in that building?
I'm not sure. I thought it was a senior building. So somebody mentioned that it's 55 and up. So I'm not. Honestly, I don't really know.
55 and up with, I think 7 units.
Okay. So yeah, I'm not sure when they're going to be open. They're quite a bit. Looks like they're quite a distance away from actually being open. So the village actually owns almost nothing. The village owns, the only property that the village owns is Village Hall, which we all see, the Department of Public Works, which is on Marbledale Road, the Tuckahoe and the Community Center, and then we have a couple of parks. But that's the only property that the village owns. So everything else that you see that's people are working on or developing, that's all private investment, all private development. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about 100 Main Street? The newer Salerno.
Oh, I'm sorry, the new building that's going up, yes. The building that you see on Main Street across from the building that's the bane of my existence that has the wood on, and former Mayor White's, I don't know, was that, it wasn't boarded up when Phil was mayor, but probably right afterwards. Yeah. Yeah, and actually I'll talk about that in a second, but the question is across the street. So that would be across the street from the Burrito Poblamo, which is supposed to be reopening soon. They're just doing some reconstruction there. That project there is going to look, when it's done, similar to the rest of the construction that Raffiani did on Main Street. It's going to have ground floor of some stores, and then it has, I believe, 2 or 2.5 stories of apartments upstairs. So sort of like you see the Quarry Inn building, it's going to be something similar to that. And I'm not sure, I know he's well underway in his construction now, so I'm not sure when that's going to be done. But then across the street, we have that building that has the beautiful wood boarded up panel forever on it. And the interesting thing about that property is it was owned by, or it has been owned by a woman who for many years, I guess just, she clearly didn't need the money to occupy the space or to rent it out. And she was just kind of poking the village in the eye. You know, people remember she painted it blue and purple, and we went through that whole ridiculousness. So she just kind of stepped away from it. So by her leaving it neglected, the village had to step in occasionally and board it up. The village actually hired somebody to board it up, to paint that, to make it look like it's not an eyesore, because we have a responsibility. Well, she has a responsibility to protect the public, and if she neglects to do that, then we can exercise our right to go ahead and do that and then bill the property for whatever it cost us to fix it. So interesting thing enough is we're just waiting. Okay, she pays her taxes every year. Had she not paid her taxes, of course we could have foreclosed on it. It wouldn't be our headache. Every year she pays her taxes. About, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, a woman walks into Village Hall and says, I wonder if you can help me out. My sister passed away. She owned all this property in Lower Westchester. Turns out the poor woman who had owned that property, she passed away, and now her sister inherited that as well as others. So we asked the sister, okay, what's your plan? She said, as soon as it's out of probate, I'm selling the thing. So hopefully we're going to see an end to that boarded up building that's been there forever, it seems. Yes, I'm sorry. The mayor always gets preference. No, I'm only kidding.
The lady that owned that was an attorney, and every time we took her to the court, she'd lose, and then she would appeal it.
Yeah, she was an attorney.
And this
Yep.
went on for years and years through four different administrations.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Mayor,
Yes.
this has nothing to do with the hotel, but is there any possibility of getting some type of transportation for many of our seniors who would like to come here and don't drive?
You don't use the dollar-ride program, I take it, the dollar-ride program through the taxi business?
A lot of people can't afford that 2 days a week.
So you're saying from your home,
Well, where, you know, yeah, Eastchester has plenty of cars, we don't have any.
does Eastchester provide transportation for people from their home to the,
Not here, not to here.
no, I mean, but to their senior center?
yes. Oh, yes.
So they'll pick you up at your house in the town
Oh,
and
yes.
bring you right to?
Right.
I wasn't aware of that,
Door to
okay.
door.
Really?
Yeah. Many years they've been doing it. Now,
Do they use a private, do they use that bus, that little minivan that I see, the senior van?
No, there is a van, there's a bus, a van, and many cars.
And there's no cost for that? You don't have to pay for that?
No, well, it's a donation. Anything that has any subsidies from the government is a donation. You
So-
can't ask for money,
Right.
just say a donation is.
Okay, so anyway, so anybody who couldn't hear, the question was, is there a means for the village to be able to provide transportation for seniors
Yes.
to get from home to where I'm standing right now? And we'll look into that. I didn't realize that the town provided that free service.
Is that the
Yeah.
building entirely in Eastchester, or was it part of Tuckahoe?
Which building?
46
Jackson, 46 Jackson.
The new building there? That's
No, the senior building.
the old building. That's all in Eastchester.
Entirely in
Yes,
town.
my understanding. Yeah, I don't believe that. David, 46 Jackson. That's not in Tuckahoe, is it? That's all in Eastchester. Yeah, that's 100% Eastchester. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Even the Main Street side?
Oh, that's definitely Eastchester. Yeah, that entire building is Eastchester. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah.
The town does have transportation, and I had inquired about it, and they would come and down to Fort Union and pick up those people who wanted to come here on Tuesday and Thursday, and all they would have to do was to call the Office of the Aging in the morning early
Mhm.
and say, 4 of us from here would like transportation to Father Hall.
So,
It was all set up.
okay, so Mrs. Mayer is telling me something I wasn't aware of, that the town of Eastchester.
You approved it,
Mhm.
and the senior center in Eastchester approved it.
Okay.
But the people who needed the ride to get from there to here didn't want to make the phone call.
Didn't want to do what? Excuse me.
Didn't want to make the phone call to call up the town.
They went by the wayside. What I'm trying to say is, it went by the wayside because nobody would pick up.
Okay, we'll actually look into it and we'll let Jennifer know.
Yeah, to investigate it further.
Yep.
No, that's only.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we'll let Jennifer know and she'll be able to explain.
I would appreciate
Yep,
that.
absolutely.
Because I've already asked at Gilda's office, and
Mhm.
she's no longer there,
Right.
okay? And there was no provision for us, and this has been recently that I.
From the
asked.
village, but apparently the town would do it
But
for,
there's many people.
Right.
That would like to come here. I mean, I bring 3 or 4 people with me
Mhm.
when I drive, okay? But it would be nice to know if there is that transportation. Eastchester bus, van stops at 46 Jackson, picks up people. Now, but they cannot come here and drop off.
we'll find out more about that. We'll let Jennifer know
I
too.
appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I don't know if it has to do with because Eastchester is a nutrition center, and maybe there's something goes on with the county.
We'll look into it. I'm sure whatever the town can do to
appreciate it,
assist.
yes.
I work with Mr. Colavito all the time, and he's always willing to do whatever he can to help the Tuckahoe seniors.
I think they're government funded, a lot of this stuff.
I know a lot of it gets funded through the community fund too, so, yeah. So, anyway, I wanted to take this opportunity, yes, ma'am? Mhm.
I want to go off everybody else's stuff.
Oh,
The
okay.
Pando,
I'm sorry?
the parking,
Yes, yes.
is it gonna go throughout the whole village and all the meters?
The Pango parking, I know it's been very successful where we've used it, so eventually it will go. Yes, I'm assuming you would like that?
I told Greg a little while ago, I parked across the street from Roman's Restaurant,
Mhm.
go in there, and I was there maybe 20 minutes, and I used the app that charged me $7.55, like I was there for 12 hours, and I was there for 20 minutes.
Well, I know that it's been very successful, so, yes, we're gonna roll it out in other, I know what you're telling me, right? Yes, ma'am.
Where is that parking? I live on Westview Avenue. And sometimes I'd like to go.
Where's the Pango parking now?
I
Or where can you park, you're saying?
No, I live on Westview.
Okay.
And sometimes I'd like to go to the train station
Mhm.
to go downtown. But it's hard for me to walk out and walk up that hill.
Right.
Is there parking there that if I wanted to leave my car?
The only parking we have that would be close, I guess, is do we still have the cash key in the, Okay, the question is, she lives on Westview, so that's up around the corner from the Pope Center. And if she wanted to take the train from the Tuckahoe station, but she didn't want to walk down the hill, let's say maybe she lives 2 blocks away, where could she park and then jump on the train to spend a day in the city? In our Lake Avenue lot, we used to have some...
There's long-term meters.
Yeah, there's long-term meters in the big lot where the brewery is. You know the big giant parking lot that we have? The one where Growlers, Beer Bistro, there's a hair cutting place in there. Well, it's a commuter lot, but there's also long-term meters there. So you can find certain meters where you can feed the meter for the day. Yes. Mm-hmm. So anyway, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for listening to us. And I want a special thanks to Lee. He was down here today for a meeting, actually coordinated. I asked him to come because I felt it was important. You know, there's been a lot of information. There's a lot of misinformation. So it's always good to hear it from the horse's mouth. And what we'll do is we may try to do another update maybe next spring when you know, you actually see the building coming out of the ground, or at that point it'll probably be fully up. But you know, because look, eventually you're all going to have people come to visit you. Your kids are going to come and visit you, and they're going to, if you don't want to feed them and put them up in your house, this is probably going to be where they're going to be staying. So anyway, so thank you for your patience, and thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor Ecklond, and we would like to do this on a quarterly basis.
Okay.
So whatever comes to mind. Thank you for the
There's always a new issue, so absolutely.